Buenas noches, hola amigos. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of Put It Together live stream. I'm your host, Daniel G. Garza. I want to welcome all of our friends watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Do us a favor, would you share this on your page and let other folks watch along with you? If you're watching us on YouTube, scroll down, hit that subscribe button, and smash that bell to let you know every time there's a new show on the air. Remember, we've got horoscopes on Monday, Christian and Daniel on Wednesdays, Card Devo on Fridays, and Put It Together live stream on Saturdays. This is a special edition show that we're doing today. So if you pressed that bell, you would have gotten the notice that we have a show today. I'm going to welcome back some friends from El Paso. I'm going to read you a little bit about their bios, but we're doing a second part to a series we're doing on HPV and its connections to other secondary diagnoses. In this case, we're talking about HIV and HPV. One of the main reasons we're talking about that is, number one, I was affected by both HIV and HPV. For those of you that have been following me for a while know that I was diagnosed with anal cancer several years ago, and it was a perfect combination of HPV, HIV, and polyps and tears anal. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a third part, so I want you to stick around. If you missed the first part, go back. This was a month ago when we did the first part. You can go back and catch up on what is HPV. And then today we're going to make those connections. Before I start, let me read you the bios. First, we're bringing up Eva Montoya. Eva M. Montoya is a native of the U.S.-Mexican border. Eva's PhD at the University of Texas El Paso in 2010 is an interim chair and associate professor in the UTEP Department of Social Work. She has more than 40 years of professional social work experience. She has published a number of peer-reviewed articles, chapters, and editorials on health disparities and infectious diseases in Mexico and the U.S.-Mexico border region. Her expertise includes food and housing security, border health, intimate partner violence, photoviolence method, tuberculosis and stigma, HIV/AIDS, homelessness, HPV infections, and community health workers. Her research is considered innovative and can be replicated by others. Eva Moya is particularly interested in social and behavioral health sciences and transnational social work studies. I feel like you need a hobby. I feel like you don't do enough. Como que algo falta.
Life is a hobby.
¿Cómo estás, Eva?
Muy bien, muy bien. ¿Y tú cómo estás, Daniel?
Bien, bien, gracias. Bienvenida al programa. Antes
Gracias.
de seguir continuando, vamos a invitar al doctor Jacob Martinez. He's been on the show before. He's an assistant professor at the School of Nursing at the University of Texas El Paso. Dr. Martinez earned a PhD in nursing from the University of Miami and a BSN in nursing with a minor in health promotion at UTEP. As a community health nurse scientist, Dr. Martinez aims to continue his work addressing health disparities affecting vulnerable Latinx populations in the U.S.-Mexico border region. His research has predominantly focused on understanding previously neglected areas of men's sexual and reproductive health, while explicitly focusing on the intersecting roles of gender, culture, and stress on sexually transmitted infections, substance use, and violence. Dr. Martinez is part of an interdisciplinary research team looking to address HPV-associated cancer disparities along the U.S.-Mexico border. He currently serves as the treasurer of the El Paso chapter of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, is a member of Association of Nurses in AIDS Care, and an associate editor for the journal Health Promotion Practice. De veras que ustedes dos, y'all need something to do. Como que no tienen... I didn't bring him up. No tienen suficiente. A ver si les mandamos un trabajito por allá. How you doing, Dr. Jacob?
Good. Blessed to be here.
Welcome back to the show. We had such a good response on the first episode. I'm glad we're doing a follow-up.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. I think this is a perfect opportunity to let our community know and really talk about these things that are sometimes hard to navigate. So definitely looking forward to having this conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, as I mentioned, the title of the show is HPV and HPV and the connection between both of them. As you can see, they are from El Paso, and we're talking somewhat about the border towns, but that doesn't mean what we're going to talk about only affects border towns. It just happened that these two great folks are from El Paso. And for those of you that are always interested on how I met my guest, there was a connection between me being in San Antonio for the Advancing the Science of Cancer in Latinos conference.
Yes.
And Eva, you were there too, correct?
Yes.
And that's how we connected. She heard me
Mhm.
speak, and then everybody that knows me knows if I've been to El Paso several times. I'm a huge fan of Chicos Tacos. I can't go without saying it. I think at some point, they're gonna have to pay me for the
Yeah,
promotion.
I think so.
Porque cada vez que hablo del Paso, tengo que hablar de Chicos Tacos. People, I know there's a love-hate relationship with them, pero yo los quiero mucho. So we met in San Antonio. From the conversations that I've heard, there are very few people that talk about anal cancer when it comes to Latinos and the gay community. And I was happy enough to participate in a previous presentation with Eva and Jessica and some of the other folks over there. And then this is where this came from, correct?
You got it, Daniel.
Before we start getting into HIV, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you folks are doing at Cuidate El Paso?
I'll be happy to start if that's okay with you, Dr. Martinez. So Cuidate El
Claro.
Paso is this very innovative research project that is led by a great team of professionals, researchers, and students. And the focus is primarily around human papillomavirus, which is a type of virus, multiple viruses, but at least two that are associated with specific cancers. And so we were entrusted with resources from the federal government to look at knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs associated with the virus. And you would stop and say, well, what is there to be known? What is there to be said? What is there to be believed? And that is what we're focusing at Cuidate El Paso, understanding what is it that parents, adults, youth, abuelos, abuelas, and others know about HPV, and documenting it from different perspectives, whether you're a survivor, whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a parent, whether you're a youth at risk. And so we spend a lot of our days doing research, collecting data, and then translating that data either into reports and articles. And then we're also spending valuable days of our weeks out in community doing education. And with COVID, we have become much more virtual. And so we're getting our message out also through the social media so that hopefully no one should have to go through the burden of living with HPV without knowing. Second, no one should die from complications associated with this type of cancer. So that's what we do at Cuidate El Paso. So we do lots of different things from nursing, psychology, social work, biology. We have students that are undergraduate, graduate, doctoral students. So it's a really neat project. Not a lot of work is being done in the human papillomavirus, especially in the Hispanic, Mexican origin communities, and that's where our focus is.
Gotcha. Hablando un poco de la gente latina, Dr. Jacob, before I get into the whole technical and talk about the definitions and such, when we talk about health issues, for instance, HPV, that is really not talked about a lot. Is afecta diferente? Does it affect us differently across the spectrum, like Latinos, African American, the white community?
Yeah, for both HPV and HIV, we're disproportionately affected across the different groups. So Latinos nos afecta más que a otras comunidades por varias razones, muchas cosas que todavía no entendemos, pero sabemos que hay muchas, lo que le llaman health disparities, que por varias razones que pueden ser por razones económicas, acceso al cuidado, simplemente el cómo navegamos la vida poco diferente que las demás de las de diferentes comunidades que existen. Y entonces yo creo que se nos dificulta un poco también llegar a un médico o a tener estas conversaciones, simplemente de estar informados. Y yo creo que eso es parte de lo que what contributes to having a higher burden of HIV or HPV.
I find it very interesting as I've gotten older to realize that we weren't really taking into consideration cultures when it came to diagnoses. Estamos en el 2022, we're in 2022, and I feel like it's only, I say in the last couple of years, I don't know if COVID opened the research market or we started, but I feel like it's only been like the last 2-3 years that we really started focusing. It's like, wait a minute, there is a difference in races and how diagnoses affect us. And I'm glad that we're opening up the market more for Latinos, and the conversations, porque como Latino, even as a health advocate, there's so many things that I didn't know. Antes de continuar, before we continue, I'm going to give you the very simple definitions of the two things we're talking about today. So HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, is a virus that attacks the body's immune system. If HIV is not treated, it can lead to AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Clarifying, they're not the same thing. There is currently no effective cure. Once people get HIV, they have it for life. But with proper medical care, HIV can be controlled. And I couldn't find anything more, but human papillo.
Papiloma.
Thank you. A type of
Virus.
virus that can cause abnormal tissue growth and other changes to cells. That was like the simplest one. I'm sure that it's bigger than that. Pero para los tontos como yo, I was like, okay, I can understand that. So let's get started with this. HIV. So I'm going to put myself in the hot seat because I like doing that. So I was diagnosed with HPV when I was 29. This is in September of 2000. Could I already have had HPV by then? Or like, it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg? Por lo regularly, which comes first? ¿Cuál viene primero? ¿O sabemos?
Bueno, Eva, or go ahead.
Mira, lo que iba a decir es que es bien complicado. Qué padre que fuera tan sencillo decir uno o el otro, pero lo que pasa es que son dos tipos de virus. Hoy en día los dos son crónicos, quiere decir que se mantienen en el cuerpo. Uno de ellos, por ejemplo, el HIV, por lo regular te presenta señales y síntomas más obvios, pero no siempre. Puede estar ahí reproduciéndose sin desarrollar SIDA, como lo decías hace ratito. El HPV, que es el de papiloma, ese puede estar dormido por años. Entonces, voy a poner un ejemplo. Vamos a decir que yo tal vez me infecté cuando era adolescente. ¿Cómo me infecté? Probablemente por actividad sexual sin protección. Mi pareja lo tenía, me lo regaló sin yo querer que me lo regalara. ¿Ok? Y no necesariamente me da ningún señal o síntoma. Pueden pasar 3, 5, 10, hasta 20 años.
Oh, wow.
Y entonces el HPV hace de las suyas, ¿verdad? Y como tú decías, ese es el virus que de activarse, por decirlo así, se puede convertir en un cáncer, pero un cáncer muy particular, un cáncer que por lo regular lesiona partes muy específicas del cuerpo. Y es ahí donde puede que haya señales y síntomas.
Okay, so based on what you're saying, I started having sex when I was very young. I was a young teenager when I was having sex. So very possible that somebody that I had sex with had HPV. And since we're talking about mid 80s to 90s, hablábamos en otro programa que no había una prueba, no había en ese entonces, right? Back in the 80s and 90s, there still wasn't really, they weren't really checking for, especially HPV in men. Because from what I understand, if I remember correctly, we were concentrating on females, and then we started fixating on men too. Entonces, I very possibly could have acquired HPV, se me infectaron con el VPH desde muy joven. ¿Eso puede abrir la puerta al VIH? That could have opened the door to HIV?
¿Qué dices, Jacob?
Pues es algo poco complicado, ¿verdad? Porque para empezar, las dos son virus. Entonces, es una complicación que, pues, es como tener ahorita, vamos a tomar el common cold con el COVID. pues no se sabe muy bien si tienes uno del otro porque los síntomas son muy parecidos. Pero yo creo que la diferencia aquí es de que el VIH sabemos que cuando despierta, que sabemos que ya se diagnostica, pues hay una prueba. Pero el VPH, pues no hay ni prueba ni para los hombres.
Right.
Entonces, si no hay una prueba, pues no se sabe ni, como dijiste, quién llegó primero, el huevo o la gallina. Y luego, pues se complica un poquito más porque, pues, el VIH sabemos que se requiere un intercambio de líquidos.
Right.
Y el VPH, pues en realidad es piel, contacto de piel, áreas sensibles, pero de piel.
Gotcha. So
Entonces, so if you had, for example, if you had intercourse at a very young age, pues you don't know, if even if you were trying to be careful and like you practice the pull-out method, which is very common, pues you could have potentially ended up with HPV, but you don't really know because
you
for
don't know.
one,
You don't
yeah.
know. Now we know that HIV affects the immune system. Does HPV do the same thing? ¿Los dos afectan el sistema inmunológico?
So there is a viral response because it is a virus. But the response is very different. And again, they're two different viruses, but one can lay, not that the other one can, but one can lay dormant for HPV can lay dormant for a potential numbers of years, and finally produce something, some type of lesion or I mean, it could be warts, it could be a number of things, just changes in even in skin that might not even be, because you could associate it with something else that you would never even think that it's HPV.
Because even HIV in the first couple of weeks of being infected will show cold or flu-like symptoms that go away. O sea, tardas 2 semanas, estás malo, te alivias, pero si no te haces la prueba, if you never get tested, you don't know that you're HIV positive. So HPV can do the same thing.
Yes and no. And the response is not going to be the same where you have flu-like symptoms, but it's going to be changes in the skin.
Gotcha.
And at the microscopic level, changes in inner area of the body, specifically the genital area, is where you see those changes.
Gotcha. So
remember that with, go ahead.
You can't just like auto diagnose yourself and go, oh, because you're talking about, we're talking about warts, and that's anal warts, I'm guessing, correct? So for a lot of us, vamos a empezar con los Latinos. For a lot of us, we could think, because we've talked about nutrition, which nutrition can sometimes lead to hemorrhoids, and hemorrhoids can be confused with warts. And so you could potentially be HPV positive and you're auto-diagnosing yourself y pensando, pues son hemorroides y fácil se van a quitar. Can you temporarily take care of the problem and you're convinced yourself que te curaste?
I mean, I think that's something that's very common. Trying to not like restrain yourself from going to get checked by a provider. But that's the problem with this, that you can have lesions or warts or different presentations of HPV and not necessarily think that they're a problem because they're predominantly painless. So you can have something and you don't even know because it doesn't produce pain. It's not until, remember that it kind of goes in stages. So if it's something more serious, typically we'll catch that because then the patients will come into the healthcare system and start talking about, híjole, pues me duele. And I don't know what it is, but it's bothering me. And that's when we get to then start to think, okay, well, this might not be a hemorrhoid. This may be something else that we need to take a look at and potentially then start diagnosing. But by then, what we do know about this is that as Hispanic or Latinos, we get diagnosed at a later stage. and have higher mortality rates because of that. So this is kind of the problem of why it's so easy to misjudge this, and it's why this is part of the reason why we do the work that we're doing.
You gave me a really good segue because I wanted to start talking about, particularly in the Latino community, porque a veces somos bien tercos. Let's be honest.
No. No.
Let's not sugarcoat the truth here. A veces somos bien tercos, pero yo también digo, not so much that we're stubborn. I think just culturally and our social norms, the way we were raised, teach us to not go to the doctor. Hombre, cúrate en la casa. Para todo tenemos una cremita. Para todo tenemos. We have a little un té para todos. Tómate un té. Drink a tea. Ponle una cremita y se te va a curar. Ponle Vaporub y te alivias. And Eva, is it getting easier to talk to the Latino community about care?
You know, yes and no. I think that with COVID, you brought a very important point. COVID has almost put like a magnifying glass. Haz de cuenta que le pusiste una lupa a la problemática. And so we started to see more conversation around COVID, for example. But then my concern is that we open up about COVID, but we almost like forgot about the other conditions that are so prevalent. And so therefore, by doing that, there are days that I think, oh my God, where have the progress that we have made as a community gone in terms of public health, such as HPV, the vaccine? We haven't talked much about the vaccine, but one of the beauties of HPV is that there is a vaccine available, Daniel, okay, that if administered early in life, ages 9 up, all the way through 45, we could be protecting close to 90% of the cancers associated with HPV that are primarily genital cancers and oropharyngeal cancer. So that's huge. However, the vaccine is there, and there is a gap between the vaccine and our communities, which means that it may be there, but how do we get it? That continues to be a challenge. Could it be that it is cost? Sometimes, because it's an expensive vaccine if you go to a private physician. Could it be that we don't know where we can get it? That could be a lack of information. Could it be that there are myths? And this is actually what gets in the way of a lot of our efforts. Los famosos mitos, esos tabús que nos ponen unos velos en la cara y que no nos dejan ver nuestras realidades y decir, espérate. Hay que hablar de HPV desde chiquitos, no porque vayamos a empezar a hablar de relaciones sexuales, y qué padre que habláramos de la sexualidad, pero ese es un tema para otro programa también, porque aunque somos seres sexuales, no nos sentimos con mucha naturalidad y comodidad hablando de los temas íntimos. Pero si lo habláramos, yo creo que estaríamos mejor como comunidad. Esa es mi observación muy personal. Entonces, we don't talk about HPV, the vaccine, as we talk about the other vaccines. But imagine if we were to norm as a country, you know, Latinos could be at the forefront of this if we really organize well. And we say, we're going to stop cervical cancer and all other HPV-related cancers in our lifetime. What does that mean? That our children, our siblings, you know, any individual between the ages of 9 and 45 would get their vaccines, 2 or 3, depending on which age group you're in. We could potentially eliminate cervical cancer, to give you an example. How cool would that be? To be part of a generation that says, no más cáncer cervicuterino, no se nos muere ninguna mujer por cáncer en el cuello de la matriz. A mí me gustaría ver eso antes de que se me acabe mi tiempo. ¿Por qué? Porque yo he visto mujeres y compañeras morir por cáncer cervicuterino y dices tú, espérate, fue HPV y no había la vacuna en tu tiempo, pero ahora sí hay la vacuna. Entonces, sí, nos falta. Hacemos avances, caminamos un poquito, a veces nos resbalamos y otra vez ahí vamos. Entonces, necesitamos mayor intención, mayores proveedores, mayor conciencia en las escuelas y, en mi opinión, necesitamos hablar de nuestra sexualidad de una manera más natural.
Yeah. And it gets frustrating, no encuentro. Pero porque a mí nunca me hablaron del sexo cuando era niño. Mis papás no hablaban del sexo, no hablaban de la sexualidad. O sea, había hombres y había mujeres y es todo lo que hay. No hay nada en medio. Y le digo, aún así, I was messing around when I was a teenager and I was gay and there was no references at home. So, para la gente que nos está viendo, o sea, no, sí, realmente no hay una conexión ni una con otro. Es una creencia, pienso yo, cultural que nos hemos forjado y la creemos. So let me make a little transition here because we've been talking about the Latino community, but I also belong to the LGBTQ community as part of the gay community. And I've talked about this in other shows, and I've made a comment talking about anything that affects the anal cavity is another taboo, porque como hombre gay, en cuanto al sexo, es parte de mi uso sexual. O sea, yo voy a utilizarlo para. Entonces, if there's something that's potentially going to stop me from having sex, I may not want to know. What are some? I mean, I'm talking about anal cancer because I have it. But what are some of the things that other conditions that can happen with somebody who has HIV and HPV in that connection?
So
is that a logical question? Does that make sense?
Go ahead. Shoot again.
Well, like for instance,
The two.
Yeah, because we're talking about
That's
the
one.
connection between both. So, as a man with HIV, well, with HIV, we've known for years now, and there's U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. There's PrEP, the pre-exposure prophylaxis. There's all these things that we can use as an HIV positive man to not infect somebody else, and we got that under control. We're like, estamos bien. But now we're talking about HPV, and for those of us who are a little older, who maybe cannot get the shots anymore, that maybe don't want to get the versions. Ya sabes, the old, si no sé, no me mata. What you don't know won't kill you, but it will. And for instance, in my case, we already know that HIV, HPV, and the tumors is what caused my cancer. Mm-hmm. Are there other things that can happen when HIV and HPV come together?
So, I mean, I think it's there's areas. This is a really very, and I hate to use the word interesting, but in a sense it is, because it's kind of, there's a combination of viruses that are attacking the body. And for somebody who has HIV, we always want to talk about treatment and getting them into care to make sure that there's follow-up and they're under medication. So one, we can reduce any type of symptomology or something that will kind of escalate or elevate to the next level. So that one, we prevent AIDS, full-blown AIDS, and then we kind of mitigate anything else from symptom management. So that's where the whole viral load, all that comes into play. We're trying to keep that down. But at the same time with HPV, so if you have one, but you consider HPV, these are both viruses that are still working hand in hand against the body, against the immune system. So it's not like there's something that's going to say, oh, today's your turn. HIV, you work on the body today. HPV, you work on the body this other day. It's not like they take turns. They're simultaneously working. And it may be, it's not like they separate from each other. But in terms of prevention, I think there's something to still be talked about, because you have or may have potential sex with somebody who may be infected or somebody who is not, there's still protection. So with HIV, we talk about PrEP, right? PrEP is huge, as it should be. But with HPV, your PrEP really is your vaccine, if you kind of think about it that way. And it's this one-time sort of thing that you can do earlier on. But if now you sort of take a step back and, like you said, you can't no longer take the vaccine, well, now you got to think about, okay, what are protection measures that I can use? So definitely the condom is still something that's very, very important because you're preventing that skin-to-skin contact.
Mhm.
Hygiene really wouldn't necessarily exclude that or would interfere there because of the fact that it is a skin-to-skin sort of issue, and that's where the transmission will likely occur. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because HPV it's still it's considered an STI, correct?
Mhm.
Exactly. It's actually
Yeah,
the
in the
most
family.
common sexually transmitted infection,
Mhm.
HPV.
Entonces mi pregunta también add to that. I only talk about anal cancer porque that's what I get. Pero hay otras cosas que pueden ocurrir. Is there other things that can
Sí,
happen?
claro.
Because I feel like HIV and HPV are like these long lost brothers that they just met. Like in my personal case, like they met and they're like, a ver qué vamos a destruir. Let's mess things up. So they helped develop that anal cancer for me. Can they develop other cancers? Can they
Mhm.
do other damage?
Absolutely, Daniel. O sea, remember, the HPV loves the company of other conditions and is very closely sort of like attached to the immune system. The immune response is how well our bodies adapt. So keep in mind that if you have a fast-paced life, if your immune system response is weak, if you have risk for cervical cancer. So I'll give you an example with cervical cancer. El cáncer de cuello de la matriz, que es uno de los cánceres más comunes en las mujeres, ¿ok? Este es un cáncer silencioso. Este no te da señales o síntomas hasta que ya está avanzado. Lo maravilloso del cáncer cervicouterino is that if you find it early, you treat it and you cure it, and no women should die from complications from cervical cancer. But again, it's closely linked to HPV. One thing you can do is get tested. So most of us go to see the provider, hopefully once a year. And we go not because we're ill, but we go because we're healthy. Okay, I'll repeat that again. It's like, what do you mean we go because we're healthy? It's like, no, we go to the doctor because we're ill. Well, that's part of the problema, that we're usually very reactionary and we wait until the last minute. And ya cuando no puedo, ya cuando me falló el VIX, el mentolato, la comadre, la oración, la vacuna, o sea, la receta, el farmacéutico, o sea, entonces sí, acudo a. But if we can find that cervical cancer early on through the pap smear o el famoso Papa Nicolau, como le decimos, o el pap test, así como el pap, no como las sodas, pero el pap test. Entonces podemos encontrar un cáncer, ¿verdad? Pronto lo podemos tratar y lo podemos curar. Ahora, el HPV le gusta, por ejemplo, el área orofaringia. Y esta por lo regular solo va a dar problemas cuando está avanzado. Entonces, los dentistas, si tú vas, por ejemplo, a un chequeo regular y tienes un buen dentista o una buena dentista, por lo regular va a observar, y si observan que hay algún problema por ahí, te van a mandar con un especialista. Entonces, como digo yo, buzos, porque el cáncer orofaringio es un cáncer que está aumentando, sobre todo en la comunidad joven. Entonces, muchas veces relacionado con el HPV. Cáncer relacionado en pene. Muchas veces el cáncer en pene, el cáncer en vulva, ¿verdad? El cáncer en la vagina son cánceres que son asociados con el HPV. Hay otra amiga del HPV y del HIV que también hemos hablado, que le encanta la compañía de estas, que viene siendo la tuberculosis. Y la tuberculosis se aprovecha por lo regular cuando hay un sistema inmuno también comprometido, ¿sí? Entonces no es como que, bueno, solo hablemos del HPV. Yo diría, ojo, ponte la vacuna si estás en edad, ¿ok? O las vacunas. Conoce tu estatus, know your status. So if you're going to be intimate with someone else, it is okay to ask about status so that you know if you are at risk or you've been exposed. If you can get cervical screening done, get it done once a year. Oral health, ideally once a year. Immune system, the strongest possible. And I'm going to say something that usually is difficult is management of chronic stress is really important. Why? Because the stress has a way of really impacting your immune response. So, en vez de estresarte o ocuparte o preocuparte, mejor ocuparte, como digo yo, ¿sí? Porque el estrés realmente crónico es una condición que realmente puede ir dañando tu respuesta. La alimentación básica y de nutrientes es siempre importante para fortalecer tu sistema inmune. Como lo decía mi colega, los condones tanto para hombres o mujeres. No importa qué preferencia sexual tú tengas, es importante que te protejas.
Es que, bueno, hay dos cosas que dijo que me van a decir. Number one, uh, we haven't really mentioned the ages. We forgot to mention in the beginning. What are the ages to get the vaccines? Because I know there's 2 or 3 shots, but what are the ages?
You can start as early as 9 years of age, right, Dr. Martinez?
Yes.
And that is boys and girls. So it's not exclusive of girls, because that's part of the other challenge, Daniel, and the public, that we usually think of this as the responsibility de las niñas. Es como que, ok, vacunamos a la niña ya cuando está grandecita y esperamos que con eso se prevenga. Es no, ¿qué pasa con los niños y los caballeros? So 9 to 25 is the ideal period of your life where you can get your vaccines and you will get the greatest protection. However, there was an approval of the vaccine to be administered beyond the age of 25. That is 26 to 45. Bueno, ya entre 26 y 45, ¿verdad? Ya tenemos más experiencia, pero no importa. Aún así, te puedes proteger y puedes aumentar la respuesta de tu cuerpo para no infectarte de HPV. Qué maravilloso, ¿no? La vacuna hasta los 45, pero es así como el tesoro de Moctezuma, la verdad. La gente no habla, los médicos a veces o las médicas no la ofrecen, y si no la ofrecen y tú no la solicitas o la demandas, pues a veces no se da.
Because I remember the last time we talked, que la frustración era que I was diagnosed with cancer at 44, y me decían, es que hasta los 45, y era 44 años me aventé sin saber. Yo nunca, I had never really done the research or talked about it with my doctor. And I think he's retired already, but I think sometimes doctors who treat HIV positive people, they kind of forget that there's other things out there. Como que se olvidan. Estamos, ándale, doctor, sí. Estamos en el keeping us alive, que we forget that there's other things. Segundo es, as a fan that I am out there, I am not putting it down. PrEP and U equals U, que it was great. También nos olvidamos que hay otras infecciones. Once we found this answer to HIV, the spread of HIV, we kind of forget that there was other things out there like STDs, STIs, and other infections. It was like, we're not going to get HIV, but yes, but you can still get other things. Y como que también, tunnel vision, ¿verdad? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very common. Unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, there's very tunnel vision. So we go in with the blinders and we think, híjole, pues nomás vienen con el especialista porque tienen VIH. Pero se nos olvida que pueden tener la presión alta, diabetes, otras cosas que normalmente, pues, o sea, eso es lo primero que debemos de pensar, pero se nos olvida. Entonces, es muy importante que cuando vas y ves a tu médico o a tu proveedor, preguntar, bueno, pues mira, ¿qué es tu historial? Vamos a empezar por ahí. Y si sabes de que tal vez una persona en tu familia tuvo pues alta presión o tuvo diabetes o cáncer de alguna otra forma o de otro tipo, bueno, pues hay que preguntar y prevenir lo mejor que podamos. Y la doctora Kimoya también dijo un muy buen punto del estrés, el manejamiento del estrés. Qué bien lo maneja uno y qué tanto está de nuestro control, porque eso ayuda también a prevenir otras cosas, otras condiciones que, pues, que a día pues se va acumulando, todo el cuerpo lo tiene que aguantar y desafortunadamente o afortunadamente, pues el cuerpo se cansa y es cuando empezamos a ver las diferentes, yo creo que infecciones o no necesariamente infecciones, pero otras condiciones médicas como diabetes, la hipertensión o cosas que pueden escalar a más alto riesgo. Entonces es muy importante tener esa conversación.
One of the things that I talk to as an HIV advocate to people, les digo, from the moment that they're diagnosed, I'm like, start talking to your doctor about your sugar, your high blood pressure, about your cholesterol, particularly si son latinos. Habla con tu doctor desde ahorita. que te hagan los chequeos, vamos a ver dónde están tus números, because even for my diabetes, we waited till the numbers were getting high. It's like, your numbers are getting high. I'm like, why didn't we talk about this when the numbers were low? It's like, hey, your numbers are low. What are you doing? And let's keep doing that. Pero uno le entra los tacos. Es que me gustan los tacos, para que veas la verdad. We have a couple of comments here before we move on. Nuestra querida Jessica dice, go Cuidate El Paso. Yes. Best team ever, of course. Great conversation. I would like to ask Dr. Martinez and Dr. Moya what has been the personal challenges they have experienced during their research.
We have like about 15 minutes left. No, just kidding. No, I think that one of the greatest challenges is to be living in the beautiful El Paso, being part of the state of Texas, and working at a time where, unfortunately, it's gotten political to talk about health, to talk about sexuality, to talk about choices. And so when you are surrounded by an environment where sometimes the politics play with people's health, it's difficult, because then what we have encountered is community members that tend to believe news that are fake or that are not accurate. And so it's like, ay, caray, ¿cómo le hacemos para convencerte y decirte que las fuentes de tu información no son las correctas? So these are the facts, and these are some alternatives. And so I think that's one of the big challenges, to continue to persist in creating confidence in science. The second thing that I call it an opportunity more than a challenge is, I think we have done a little bit better, not a lot with women, in terms of getting the attention and the traction. But I think we have, or at least I have encountered a little bit more challenges in involving men in the same way that we would like to involve other women. So, como tú lo decías, Daniel, a veces los caballeros son un poquito más, ¿qué es la palabra? Pues más tercos, o son, todo lo puedo, no me pasa nada, yo soy Superman, o sea, machín rin, mira nomás qué bien estoy, o sea, and how do we get them to say, wait a minute, this is about you and the other meaning whether it is your female sexual partner, LGBTQI partner, whoever that identity is. It isn't about the other person to only protect his or herself, but it's your responsibility to do the same. So that second part. And then the third is that I wish the vaccine would be more accessible and available and affordable. Just like we have made the COVID vaccines, for example, and the booster be so normal to a certain degree, I would really hope that the HPV is as accessible and available. And then the last thing that sometimes gets in the way is the idea that this type of vaccine could mess up your fertility, could mess up your libido or your sexual drive, could potentially engender, especially children and youth, to become sexually active earlier. And so we know from research that that's not the fact, So yeah, those are some of the challenges that I've seen.
Dr. Jacob?
Híjole, pues, dieron a todo lo que dijo la doctora. Check. Te diré que yo creo que para mí lo que se ha hecho un poco difícil, se me dificulta, es saber de que es un problema para los varones. Entonces, obvio, soy varón. Entonces me meto en esta temática del VPH a tratar de manejar este virus, este problema. Pero también hay muchos recursos que, digamos, para manejar esto con los caballeros. Entonces, yo creo que es algo que, de mi parte, también inexperiencia, creo, porque también, pues, sigo aprendiendo. Todos los días es una oportunidad de aprender. Y yo creo que esta oportunidad que se me ha dado con este equipo que estoy trabajando, pues, todos los días aprendo algo nuevo. Pero a la vez también, pues, es algo que es muy común, o se platica más, se maneja más el tema con las mujeres. Entonces, pues para tratar de hablar, simplemente tener una conversación con otro varón es muy difícil, pero a la vez yo creo que, como dijo la autora, es una oportunidad de tratar de abrir mentes nuevas o tratar de hacer guiar estas conversaciones diferentes. Entonces, cada vez que tengo la oportunidad, pues lo hago, con mis amigos simplemente. Entonces, obvio que siempre agarro pues miradas diferentes o así respuestas que tal vez te sacan de onda, pero son momentos de aprendizaje.
Yeah. It is difficult to do
Yeah.
these shows and have conversations. Yo porque soy bien hablador, and like, let's put it out there. Like, yeah, look, si lo sabe Dios, que lo sepa el mundo. But even, I'll admit it, even after all these years, even for me, sometimes to talk about some of the more sensitive parts is a little like, oh, like, do I really want to talk about this? Pero, see, somebody's got to start, you know what I mean? Someone has to tap the domino and start the sequence. Si no, donde, so I'm so glad that you two were able to come on the show and we can talk about this. And I hope for anybody out there, si hay alguien en tu familia, si tienes algún familiar masculino que no le gusta hablar, no tienen que hablar, mándenles este video para que escuchen, para que vean, y ojalá con eso we can start the conversation. We have another question from Jessica for y'all. Let's turn it around a little bit. And also, what are the personal highlights that you have experienced since doing the research? A ver, lo bonito.
Go for it, Dr. Martinez. I'll follow you.
Bueno, lo bonito para mí es de que I've really had the opportunity to learn and grow with Dr. Moya. So full disclosure here, la doctora is mentoring me in this area. So my area predominantly has been with STIs in the side of HIV prevention, but I'm now beginning to sort of apply some of this that knowledge and bring it over to HPV. But it's really been a learning curve, and I'm really blessed and just fortunate enough to have a mentor locally. That is really hard, like you said, to find people that will that are engaged in this type of work. So for me, that's been one of the many blessings that I'd like to say. And it's learning. It really is learning because there's so much that we don't know yet, and trying to address that next level of how do we make it better? How do we make it better for our people?
It's both ways, Dr. Martinez, but you know what? One of the big joys is to see the students that come into our team knowing very little about HPV and walking away as like ambassadors. It's like, oh my God, you mean to tell me that I can do this for myself and therefore I can do it for others? So see, the transformation is really important. And then the second, really the big joy, of the work that we do is that, the work that we do in cancer prevention is so important because cancer will eventually be one of those conditions that will touch each of our lives directly or indirectly. So how incredible is it that we can be part of a generation where we can say we put a stop to HPV related cancers? How cool is that? Talk about transformation, talk about doing something very meaningful because we have the vaccine, we have the knowledge, we have the providers, for God's sake. Then what is keeping us from making sure that we extend the information to everyone and make vaccines accessible and available? I trained back in the 70s as a social worker, and the first internship that I did was on cancer prevention, and it was cervical cancer. And to this day, I remember a young mother of 3 who died at the age of 27 from complications of cervical cancer. And the community was so undereducated that they felt that it was something contagious. So just when I think after so many years that we make some progress, the reality is that, yeah, we made some progress, but we have not made the progress that we can and should. So it reminds me that don't get too comfortable, Eva, because we have our work is cut out for us. Yeah. And so, but our work is about saving lives and improving the quality of life of every individual. Now, I do want to say that especially if we hear, si están en este espacio o nos van a estar escuchando compañeros migrantes de nuevo ingreso a este país, es sumamente importante que no se olviden de su salud. A los migrantes y las migrantes vienen a este país con mejores indicadores de salud que la mayoría de nosotros. Ya cuando estamos aquí muchos años empezamos a desconchinflarnos así como los carros más rápido. Sí, pero nuestros hermanos y hermanas que vienen como migrantes traen una protección de salud increíble. Wow. No se atengan demasiado a eso. Por lo que más quieran, protéjanse, cuídense, prevengan, vacúnense. Ustedes tienen derecho, busquen a las personas que los puedan apoyar, ¿verdad? en donde haya servicios de calidad y con dignidad, pero no sientan que no tienen acceso a lo que aquí en este país tristemente no es un derecho. La salud no es un derecho, más bien es como un commodity, algo que tú compras, pero es muy importante que nuestros hermanos y hermanas de nuevo ingreso a este país se protejan.
Y luego ahorita, now we're getting through, we're still not out of COVID yet. And now we got monkeypox to deal with too. And plus everything else. So please out there, like take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. It's one thing that we haven't talked about. We have about 10 minutes. And before I get into the words of wisdom, because we can't leave without words of wisdom, but mental health. How we know how HIV affects the mind, because I know personally the self-esteem, the depression that comes with HIV. How does mental health and HPV work together?
Híjole, yo pensaba que...
Nos otra hora.
No, yo creo que al igual que el VIH, hemos hecho entrevistas con mujeres, sobre todo porque no encontramos caballeros dispuestos a hablar de su experiencia de vivir con cáncer, hasta que no te conocimos a ti, Daniel. O sea, para entrevistarte. En realidad, la mayoría de todas nuestras participantes fueron mujeres. Yo creo que lo que escuchamos de las sobrevivientes es esto. Primero, un sentido de frustración porque sentían que no entendían lo que estaba pasando. Y aun cuando les estaba pasando, no entendían lo que era un cáncer relacionado con HPV. Y cuando escuchan la palabra cáncer, por lo regular, lo primero que se nos viene en la mente es pérdida, muerte, discapacidad y todo lo demás. Entonces, ese sentido de pérdida, ese sentido de grief, ese sentido de cómo tu sexualidad es afectada, nos decían las mujeres, es que a veces el compañero o la compañera ya no me quiere. Es que a veces el hecho de que me hayan quitado el útero me hace sentir menos mujer y dices tú, ouch. O sea, si eso te está pasando, entonces emocionalmente hablando, algo muy fuerte está pasando en ti, donde asocias tu sexualidad y tu feminidad o masculinidad con una parte de tu cuerpo. Entonces, sumamente importante que cuando hablemos ya sea de HPV o de HIV, nunca olvidemos los elementos emocionales y el rol que tiene con la salud mental. Porque mira, la depresión, tú la mencionaste, una tercera de la población está afectada y viviendo con depresión. Y si a esa tercera parte de la población le aumentamos estas tres condiciones, entonces no podemos separar una de la otra, en mi opinión.
Yeah. Doctor?
I think she said it very well. This is, at the end of the day, we need to look out for ourselves and be able to have that capacity to reach out and talk to our social support, our networks, so that we can build on our strengths so that we can continue, because the fact is that these are conditions that can really be detrimental to our health. So we need to be able to not only think about who our support system is, but really reach out to them when we're in need. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout the years that I've been doing this. When I as a nurse, I trained in Miami for some time in the transition unit, where we would transition young adults, youth into adult clinics, and that was one of the biggest things that I remember having these conversations with young guys, both young guys and girls. Having these conversations about, hey, who's your support system? Is it your friends? Is it your family? Maybe not family because of X, Y, and Z reasons that come with the fact that they came out, and maybe the acceptance, all these other potential issues. But reaching out to those that are already in their support in their own network and really embracing them and having conversations. These are difficult conversations by all means. This is not an easy conversation. But if we can recognize it and really talk about that within our social network, within that people that we fall back to, then that gives us some strength and some motivation to then keep going forward with whatever it is, whatever an issue it is. But I think that's key. That's one of the things that I would say off the top of my head.
Awesome. And of course, here on the show, we have a tradition of sharing some words of wisdom before we go. So, Eva, Words of wisdom, ¿qué palabras sabias nos puedes compartir?
La salud empieza contigo. No se la dejes ni al médico, ni a la médica, ni al sistema de salud. Haz todo lo que esté en tu alcance y más allá para cuidarte, protegerte, amarte y realmente gozar de esta vida que tenemos, que es extraordinaria y maravillosa. Y si ya estás viviendo con HPV, con HIV o con alguna otra condición, por favor, que la condición no te defina. O sea, el diagnóstico no eres tú. Estas condiciones, si son crónicas, hay que tratarlas, manejarlas y hay que superarlas. Y utilízalas a tu favor.
Doctor?
I don't think it's words of wisdom, but you said something right now, and this is a perfect space to talk about it, is monkeypox. If you are in a network and you may potentially know that somebody or within that network there might be some spread, know that there's a vaccine for it too. So if you haven't thought about it, really start thinking about a vaccine if you are in that close vicinity of that network of people who may have monkeypox. The other thing is it's not a sexually transmitted infection. So right now that's huge. People are thinking of it as a sexually transmitted infection, but it's not. But again, there's a vaccine for it. So that's my word of wisdom for you and for the audience.
And I normally don't throw in my words of wisdom, but in this case, it's something that affected me personally. I can tell everybody out there, toda la gente que está viendo, por favor compartan este video si saben de alguien. Pero when it comes to HIV and HPV, I lived through it. Unfortunately, I was part of that generation that we didn't know about HPV or we didn't talk about it. I was part of the generation also that we ignored HIV and what was happening. And I come from a culture and a family and a religion that didn't allow us to talk about sex or sexuality or diversity, protection for many reasons. And I'm not putting any blame on my family or whatever, but it is what it is. But we live now in a time where we have all this information. And let me assure you that if you have children, if you don't have the conversation, the internet will. And most of the times we find the wrong information. So, por favor, tómense el tiempo. Vamos a dejar un lado la cultura, las normas sociales, la religión. Let's leave aside social norms, culture, and religion. Y vamos a tener esas conversaciones porque son sus niños que están por medios. No dejen que ellos vivan. Don't let them live what I had to go through to get to where I am now. I mean, I'm a healthy-ish. Ahí andamos. But I have the blessing that I have a channel that I can share this information. Not everybody does, and not everybody has access to it. So please share this. Una de las mejores protecciones que le podemos dar a nuestros hijos, y digo nuestros porque es nuestra responsabilidad como trabajadores en la salud. It's our job to share this information. So please do not let this land on you. Please continue to share it. Let me make sure I share some information. If you want to get in touch with these folks, right there, it's Cuidate EP por El Paso, Cuidate EP at utep.edu. EDU, por favor, pay attention. 915-747-6313. And if you want to follow them on Facebook, they have a really cool Facebook page. Go check them out. Facebook.com/cuidateep/ go check them out there too. I'm gonna leave these up. Any final words before we leave?
Vacúnate y protégete.
Salud de vida.
Y para toda la gente en El Paso, para todos los amigos que tengo ya, all my friends that I have now in El Paso, I will be there in September. If I remember correctly, let me look at my calendar really quick. I will be there September 9
Excellent.
and 10 para que se van apuntando para ir a echarnos unos tacos.
Es lo que te iba a decir, te vamos a invitar a unos tacos.
Ya estamos, ¿no? Y,
¿Ok?
ya se me va la boca. But I know that I get there the morning of the 9th or mid.
Okay.
But I would love to get together and have a deeper conversation if we can about this. And ya saben que estoy a sus órdenes. Anything that I can do.
Muchas gracias.
Para la gente que está viendo, for everybody's watching, I'm going to link up, so you can probably catch it right here, somewhere up here. I'm going to link up the conversation that we have about HPV a month ago. So if you want to go and watch that episode, you can
Excellent.
watch it. And don't say goodbye to these folks, because we're going to have them back. There's so much more information that we want to talk about. We haven't even begun to tap into everything we want to talk about. So espero que vuelvan a acompañarnos, que regresen
Claro.
al programa, porque me imagino que hay mucho más que tenemos que hablar. Hay mucho más.
Sí.
No se vayan. I'm going to put you in the green room for a second. I'll be right back for you. Give me 1 second. Para toda la gente que nos está viendo, for everybody who's watching us, thank you so much. We want to remind you that we have shows every day of the week. You can catch us on, let me bring up the board. There we go. We have Wednesdays, Christian and Daniel show. On Fridays, the Cardivo. And on Saturdays, put together live streams. We have special shows pop up. So if you are following us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn, and you will get notifications of our shows. If you're on YouTube, scroll down, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. We're at littlemexicanproductions.com, hashtag Little Mexican Productions Inc. También para la gente que quiera, my book is up for sale, Grumpy Bunny and the Colors Game, $20 each. Contact me. Está en inglés y en español, Conito Gruñón, El Juego de Colores. It's a guided meditation book for children. So if you have kids and you want to help them channel their energy, this is the book for them. Pero también para los grandes. It's good for adults too. So reach out to me through either whatever channel you're watching us, and we take all of the virtual payment options, and we'll get the information from you. So make sure, if you want to learn how to meditate, comuníquese con nosotros. Y acuérdense, está en inglés y en español. ¿Qué más quieren? En los dos idiomas. Entonces, por ahora, I want to say thank you to Emma Moya and Dr. Jacob Martinez for joining us. Big hello to Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, for helping us put all this together. We missed you on the show today, but we'll get you next time. Por ahora, I want to say thank you to everybody. Gracias a todos. And hey, put it together. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.